And he's like, "Hey, I saw there's a big pile of rocks in the road, and I decided to move it. And there's this big pile of money under it. So I thought I'd return it to you so you could give it to whoever it belongs to." And he's like, "Oh, that." King's like, "That's for you. That's your money." And he's like, "No, that's not mine." He's like, "No, no, it is. It's." And he says, "He who travels the road best is he who makes the road smoother."
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dev Life podcast. Today, we're actually going to be exploring how discipline, design, and digital building blocks of the web are all coming together in software development. So, Matt, we have a very awesome guest today. This is Burton Smith, and he has mastered the art of scaling a design system at companies like Zocdoc, and then he was at Microsoft before that. But kind of fun fact I'm gonna put in here right from the beginning, he's also mastered the art of karate. So along those lines, today we're diving deep into the kata of web development, including the precision of web components to the strategic questions that define world-class UX. But whether you're architecting a massive enterprise system or just trying to write cleaner, more reusable code, this really is an episode I think everybody's going to enjoy and get a lot of value out of. But before we go any further, let me introduce again. This is Burton Smith, everybody. So welcome to the show, Burton.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is an honor.
Yeah. And Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I mean, I'm excited to learn some katas and how that works with dev. Like, it's awesome having you on the show.
It's good to be here.
Burton, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I always kind of try to stalk our guests before we get them on the episode. But from what I understand, you kind of started in sales support and then transitioned from there into software development. And then before long, it really didn't look like long. All of a sudden, you were like working at Microsoft, like from here to as high as you go. But then now you're working at Zocdoc, right? And you're a
Mhm.
senior web platform engineer. So did I get that all right? Or
That is correct. Yeah.
cool. Tell us a little bit more about that though. Like where did you get that start with software or with support? And then how did you make the transition?
Yeah. And the climb to that was felt much longer to me than probably it looks on my resume. But uh, I started in sales support, which basically is a customer service rep. I started working on that, and we went through a series of acquisitions. And as we were going through that, we quickly lost a lot of our digital tools to help us run our business the way that we had before. And I happened to be going to school for information systems. And I said, you know what? Hey, if you can give me an editor and a space to create stuff, I'll start building these tools out for you guys. And they did for some reason. And that was a big risk on there. And I don't know what they were thinking, but they gave me a nice sandbox that I couldn't blow anything up in. And yeah, I just started building tools for them. And it was interesting because being a customer service rep and then going to that was a jump that took actually a lot of effort. Being nobody would typically think of a customer service rep as being an IT person, but I wanted to do that, so I just kept kind of raising my hand anytime they had anything IT related. I was just like, "I got it, I'll do it." Started raising my hand enough times, they just started thinking about me as the IT person. And eventually that was the vibe I was putting out, I guess, and had built up enough trust that they were willing to take a risk on me.
We actually had someone at Limble who did that same kind of thing where she had been working in customer success and then moved over into some engineering, but I feel like it's like a secret power move because you have all this experience with what are the users happy with and not happy with? What are their biggest complaints? What are the biggest problems? And then you can take that knowledge back to the engineering team and be like, "Oh, well, this is what's up," So it's I feel like a really cool way to get into programming.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
also just want us to like say the power of raising your hand. Like,
Mm.
that is how you jumped into the role you wanted. You raised your hand.
Right.
And I was thinking about this the other day in my career is the times that I've been promoted or like went to a role I wanted to. It started with me saying like, "Hey, yeah,
I'll do
I'll do this thing." Yeah, like, and not complaining about not getting extra compensation, and then eventually you become the guy. So that is
right.
Mhm.
advice for those listening. Raise your hand.
Yeah. A willingness.
But so
Would
back to the roots of this also karate. When did you start karate? Is that before cells? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it all started back when I was a little kid and started watching Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's my origin story right there. It all just started with, a kid at 3 o'clock in the afternoon every day watching Ninja Turtles. But yeah, I mean, I've always had a lifelong fascination with martial arts and things like that. Um, and yeah, I worked through high school and through college teaching martial arts, and that was my vocation, and I loved it. It taught me so much that really did start to build the foundation of what I know today and how I approach things today. The philosophies, the idea of always being learning, always being willing to try new things.
Mhm.
There's nothing more humbling than you're a black belt in one style martial art, and then you go try another one, and it's like you're a white belt all over again, right? So my first black belt was in Japanese sword fighting. So I got that when I was a teenager, and then I got a first degree black belt in mixed style martial arts when I was in my early 20s. And then I got a second degree black belt in another style of martial arts. And then I got a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Every time I go to these new styles, I basically had to learn or start over again and be willing to do that, hopefully grabbing and learning from what I could from the previous martial art and then just building on top of that to expand my skills.
It's all clicking now. Like from a young age, you were raising your hand. Like, okay, yeah, sign me up to go fight with swords. I now sign me up to fight with my fists. And so
Yeah.
when it was time to sign up to do code, you're like, let's go. So
Why not? This is way easier than someone choking me out all the time. Let's do that.
yeah.
This is
Important question here. Which of the Ninja Turtles is the best one?
Oof, okay. Well, I'm a big fan of Michelangelo. He's a party dude. I'm really big fan of his growing up.
Absolutely same. I don't
Okay.
know. There is something to be said for Donatello, though. That bow
You
staff
know,
is cool, but
So so okay, noob question here, I guess. What color are they again? Like I remember the colors, I forgot the names.
Michelangelo's orange.
Okay, yeah, he was my favorite.
And he had the nunchucks, right?
Yeah.
yeah, bingo. Yeah.
And then Donatello is the one with the bow staff. He's purple.
Hmm.
Leonardo had what's the proper name for the swords?
The katanas.
Katanas. Okay. And he's
Mhm.
blue. And then Raphael was kind of the like angry red turtle. And it was what are those short
The
daggers?
size. Yeah. They're like little forks kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Did you have a favorite, Matt?
No, it was the orange one, Michelangelo.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
was
He's a
cool.
funny one. And he liked the pizza. We were just talking about pizza.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had, as the kids say these days, he had Riz. So some Gen Z's laughing their face off right now. Okay, but back to the main discussion. So you worked at one of the world's largest tech giants at Microsoft, and now at a major health tech platform. What was the biggest culture shock in how these two different environments approach front end architecture?
Yeah. At Microsoft, we were a small team that serviced quite a few engineers that used our platform. Very, very interesting things kind of evolved as I was there. We went from, we created our components, our design system using web components. And I'm sure we'll talk a little more about that later. But it was amazing to see as the product became better, as the design system became better and better, our reach began expanding wider and wider. Much more, there were a lot more teams that began adopting it and using it as an alternative to their existing platforms because of the power that it brought. And so we had quite a few different organizations taking advantage of our design system. So I think at one point we had like 350 or 400 engineers that were participating and using our design system. So that was um, a lot because they were all kind of using them in different ways in different parts of their application, and so there was a lot of context switching that we had to do to be able to learn, how they use those components and whatnot. Whereas at Zocdoc, uh, it's almost like a startup. A little less of an enterprise type feel, much more of a fast moving startup feel. Everyone wants to move fast, and the product is much smaller, which is kind of fun. And so we get to learn a lot more about the different aspects of how the design system is being used and how we can help scale it for our engineers, which is pretty awesome.
Very cool.
Well, what were kind of the biggest differences there? Like with the code base in particular, you've got this startup and then you have this like really uh I guess built up enterprise app with Microsoft, but like as you were actually implementing the design, how did that process differ between the two scales there?
Yeah. So I feel like at Microsoft, we were a little more removed from the actual product. We didn't know as much about the products that our design system was going into. We were in sometimes a very completely separate organization from other consuming products that were in ours. So we were very far removed from the actual implementation piece of it. So a lot of times get requests and people coming in asking for things, and they're like, "Hey, we're trying to use this in this way," and we're like, "What? What is that? What part of the application is this?" And they're like, "Oh, we're in a completely different organization, but we needed a design system to build with, so we're using yours." So that was an interesting way to try to build things because we had to build it in a very, very agnostic way, right? Our design system had to be very agnostic and very flexible and open for interpretation depending on what team was using it. Whereas at ZocDoc, we're much more intimate with the actual implementation. We're, helping, with the integrations directly. We are helping with code migrations into the product itself. The product is much smaller, so we know a lot more about the code space that all of our stuff is going into. So there's a lot of coupling that's happening with the design system, which actually we're having to actively pull away from and try to decouple a little bit from. So because there's so many specific requests and it's so closely tied to the actual product that there's a lot of feature specific behaviors and things that are always being requested of the system that we're trying to like push back against a little bit to try to keep it a little more agnostic.
Yeah.
So, how did your experience teaching others in karate, for example, or public speaking help you become a better engineer when it comes to explaining complex technical whys to stakeholders, for example?
Oh, that's a really good question. So it's interesting at Microsoft going going from I was a solution architect, full stack .NET solution architect at the job before Microsoft. And then I moved into design systems, which was very specific, very scoped front end development, which was awesome. I loved being able to dive deep on that. But the thing that was interesting to me was the amount of time that I then needed to spend on education and teaching people about what design systems were, how to use the design system appropriately, how to consume it correctly in their application and get things wired up correctly. So I spent a great deal of my time on that education piece and getting people informed about design systems. So I spent, I would say, probably a half to two-thirds of my time doing that, not just coding. So that was a little bit of a shift going from being in the code all day, full stack engineering to this paradigm where I'm doing a lot more teaching. And then even now, moving into ZocDoc, it's been great because the maturity level of the design system, because they've operated so fast and kind of at a startup pace, the design system itself is due for an upgrade, maturity step in the design system maturity model. So now being able to educate people and say, hey, here's where we are right now, here's where we want to be, and here's what we can do with a full-fledged design system, with capabilities of theming, light, dark mode, all this stuff. And just being able to help show the potential of what the design system can do once we start to evolving it. Being able to articulate that and communicate that has been paramount. Like there's if I can't do that, then it's very hard to sell the design system, which unfortunately is a massive part of design systems is selling people on it, getting people on board with, hey, we're building a design system that is very opinionated, that may not be in line with your opinion, but we still want you to use it. So, there's a lot of salesmanship involved with that process, and being able to communicate that and articulate that is a key factor in being able to be successful with design systems.
So let's kind of stop there because I can remember being, maybe a younger engineer, and if someone had said design systems, I think I may have misunderstood exactly what they were talking about. Design is one thing, but design system I think is its own thing. So how would you describe that for someone who's unfamiliar with design system? Like what are we talking about exactly? Why would a company want to implement their own design system? Let's kind of dig into that a little bit before we keep going.
Yeah, and this is, I feel like a little bit of unfortunate branding with design systems and with the word. A lot of people think design systems are a designer tool, but when in reality, no. It's the way I like to scope things for design systems is design systems are the way that we build applications, and it's the way that we try to build them in a scalable way. So a lot of times, people think about, Material UI is a famous design system. Fluent UI is Microsoft's design system. There's a lot of these really big names in design systems out there, and they are basically branded ways of building applications. So when we sit down and try to set up a design system, there's a lot of things that go into it, color palettes, what components do we need in the design system? But really there's things that need to go into it like voice and tone, like what's the kind of vibe that we want to have in the application itself? And that will help inform a lot of the other things. How do we manage all of our components and documentation and who can contribute to it and all these governance model things? There's a lot of deeper meaning and processes behind the design system itself. So yeah, it's a little misleading with that word design in there, but really, design systems are they're a platform tool to help us build scalable user interfaces.
So when you're building your design systems, is there a particular code framework that you're a fan of for front end? Like, is it Angular or React or something like that?
Uh, all of them, and then I
Um,
say that little tongue in cheek. I actually prefer web components for design system,
mhm.
and that's kind of sounds a lot of people when they hear web components are like, "Yeah, I use web components. I write my web components in React, or I write my web components in Vue." But actually, there is a standards based web component. It's a W3C spec, usually called custom elements. It's usually web components is this idea that involves custom elements, shadow DOM. A lot of people have heard of shadow DOM, usually negative things, unfortunately, but shadow DOM, HTML templates, things like that. So but the cool thing about that is that when you write your design systems and web components are framework agnostic. So I can use them in any framework that I want to. So I can drop them in a React component or an Angular component. And actually, I joke, semi joke, that one of the hardest things when I got to Microsoft about building a design system of web components was learning everybody else's frameworks because I thought I was like, I don't have to worry about frameworks anymore. I'm writing them in web components now. But the reality is that in order to help people, consume and use the design system, I now had to learn Angular and React and Vue and Solid.js so that I could teach people how to now integrate their web components into that framework that they're using. So
Yeah.
that's usually my weapon of choice.
Nice. And I do want to get into that a little bit more as well, because I know web components is something you've kind of become known for of sorts. But I am curious, like again, going back to this difference between more of a startup feel to something more like Microsoft that is a larger enterprise. But at what point, like, a lot of teams maybe start to try to build their own design system too early, or maybe some even too late. But what
Mhm.
really do you think are those, quote unquote symptoms or signs that, hey, it's really necessary for us, or it would be a really smart move for us to start making our own design system?
Yeah, I think I think the first thing is you should ask if there's already a design system at your company. I think that's part of the some people don't realize that their company may already have a design system that they can use. But I think that anytime you need to start building an application, I think it's important to start thinking with the system mindset and thinking about how you can start reusing things. Because the moment you can make things portable and reusable is the moment you start having a design system, whether you mean to or not. And so if you, let's say you start creating components and you're like, well, we have a button component and we have a dialogue component and we have, and you start creating these collections of components, you are starting to build a design system, whether you want to or not. And so I think it's important to now start thinking about scalability and saying, how do we make sure that we can scale these in other environments, other implementations if we need to, right? So, not just in my specific feature, I want to make sure that this can translate over to other features as well, because that's one of the key tenets of a design system is we want to build consistency across the user experience. And we want to try to uh, reduce that cognitive load that developers have by creating user interface consistency. It's they did an interesting study with Nike actually one time where they had a user go through the customer journey, and their application, buttons looked square and had one color, and then as they moved into the e-commerce experience, it was clearly a different application by a different team. Their buttons were rounded and a different, and they were orange instead of black, and they had a different look and feel. And actually, people were a little bit caught off guard, thinking maybe their session had been hijacked or they had been moved to the wrong site or something like that. And
Mm.
every time we introduce these kind of nuances throughout the customer journey, that increases the cognitive load on our users and makes them more and more stressed as they use our application. We don't want that. We want them to feel very comfortable and very happy in our applications. And we want them to do the things that we ask them to do. And so having a design system and having that consistency layer throughout the application can really help drive a quality user experience. So having that in your mind and thinking about how do I scale these components from one place to another, I think really is important. If you're planning on building any kind of user interface, is a very, very important mindset to have.
Um, I bet the marketers listening would say it probably is good for your bounce rates to have consistency too. Right. So let's say I'm working at a team and, we use something like Material UI, but, we want to make it our own, but we don't
Mhm.
really want to spend the time to, make a whole custom design system. So we take MUI and we start changing it to make it our own design system. And then we start consuming that. How do you feel about that approach?
Yeah, so it's kind of the build versus buy, right? Do
Yeah.
I do I build my own or do I buy one and customize it? And I think the magic, it depends, I think, comes into here because I think it depends on one, the level of skill of the team as well as the bandwidth of the team. So if I'm a one man show running, every aspect of IT, I'm doing the e-commerce site, I'm doing the networking systems, I'm doing everything. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense to build your own from scratch and try to maintain it. Likewise, if I'm a back end engineer and we just have a whole room of back-end engineers. We don't have any front-end engineers that have experience in user interface development. Probably taking a pre-developed design system off the shelf, you're probably going to be a lot safer than trying to home grow your own in those scenarios to make sure you hit things like accessibility and proper semantics in your components and things like that. A lot of those component libraries will have most of that built in for you. Now, if you're a dedicated team and you are able to build your own, I'm a big proponent of that because scale and longevity of the product itself. I always, a lot of people say don't think of design systems as a product, but I kind of do. I think that, we need to think about it as, how do we maintain it and market it and do all of these things. And I've seen time and time again where people have, pulling MUI off the shelf, like you said, they've customized it and that got them really pretty far, pretty fast. But then as soon as they needed something outside of that, then it becomes harder and harder and harder to now add in those new features. And then when the time comes to upgrade to the next version, you now have this technical debt that you have to work around and make sure that can either upgrade or be removed safely with the next version. So it may buy you speed initially, but I think in the long run of the product, it will slow you down ultimately or can cause problems. So I'm usually a big proponent of building it. If you have the skills and the manpower, you'll have much more long term happiness with the design system that way.
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely seeing with like the single responsibility principle, right? Like
Hmm.
we're using one component and then all of a sudden it becomes three different components, but we're married to, this design system that got online and now we have to, make this component do some weird things.
Oh, for sure.
So Matt, well, maybe it was I can't remember now. I think it was Matt mentioned web components earlier on, and I said I wanted to go back to it, and I do. I think it would be a good time for that. So, like, you do go around, you give these presentations on this. You obviously have a passion for web components, but like, what is it about web components that really excites you in relation to all of this, and just in general?
I think there's a couple of things. One, I think they're pretty cool technology. They provide some great features like cross framework compatibility. They're framework agnostic. But I think the other thing too is that they're kind of uncharted territory in some aspects. Uh, when I got to Microsoft, one of the things that I noticed was, there was this big promise of web components. Oh, you can use them anywhere. You can plug them into React, you can plug them into Angular, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I got there and actually started doing it and helping teams start using these components, I realized that there was a pretty big gap between the promise and reality where yes, they did technically work in those scenarios, but using them and the developer experience in those scenarios was terrible. It was so bad. We get so used to having, like, when we write with a view component, when you start using props and things like that, you can define the types of props and you have type validation with your props, and it'll tell you when you're misusing APIs, and you'll get autocomplete. You'll get hover information. When you hover over it, it'll give you contextual information and docs and things like that. And I realized that's not the reality with web components. If you're lucky, you'll add a web components to a page and it won't do anything. But in most frameworks, when you add a web component to a page, it'll blow up on you and say, hey, you can't make up elements. That's not allowed. Like React, if you start throwing custom elements and web components in a React template in JSX, it freaks out at you. It's like, whoa, 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 you cannot just make up element names. That's not allowed. So you have to teach these environments about your components. And so seeing that gap that between the promise and reality, the developer experience that our devs were seeing with this, I realized there's an opportunity here. I think there's we have an opportunity to close that gap and provide just as or better experiences with our web components for our developers than what they're getting with their native frameworks or with their JavaScript frameworks. So I actually started building a lot of open source tooling around this. Created the Web Components Toolkit, which comes with type generation for JSX and Svelte and Vue and all these, and editor extensions for VS Code and all this stuff, so that you can get all of these cool features that you could normally get using another framework, but you can get them with Web Components now. Even in HTML, you can have autocomplete and type checking and all that in a standard HTML file, which I think is pretty rad because you can't do that with JS frameworks. So I think that's pretty nifty.
I was looking at some code that's pretty old the other day that could maybe benefit from this. I will say no more on that topic, but at a company like Zocdoc, where performance can impact user health outcomes, how do web components help or hinder the speed and accessibility of the site?
Yeah. Oh, so funny story. We're not actually using web components right now at ZocDoc. Yeah, I joined the team, and everyone's like, "Are you going to get them to start using web components? If the shoe fits, then then maybe we'll go with it. But we're starting to see a lot of amazing things coming from companies with web components, not just with design systems themselves, but also with the offering that they're providing. So, for a perfect example, is Shopify. Shopify has been doing some really amazing work with their components. So before the experience is was that you have a Shopify site and you had your content site, and so users would go on your content site, read about your product or whatever it is that you had. Then they would jump over to the Shopify site to complete the e-commerce aspect of it, and then be bounced back to your content site. Or you could use the Shopify API and recreate the UI on your content site. Well, they came back and said, I think we can do something better. And I think they call it storefront web components, where you can literally grab web components and drop them on your site and have the Shopify user experience directly on your site. And it'll just, make the appropriate API calls back to the Shopify server for you. And so you can, without having to rebuild the UI, you could have the integrated experience in your existing application. So you can control that user experience start to finish without having to bounce out to another site, which I think is amazing. And I think maybe there's opportunities like that with Zocdoc as well, where we can start bringing great healthcare user experiences to sites directly. So your dermatologist could have Zocdoc embedded on their site and schedule an appointment directly on their site without having to bounce out to another site. But that's still not available. I won't. I'm not promising anyone anything about that. That's something that I think is an opportunity where web components could bring great new experiences to users.
There you are raising your hand again. I'll do it. I'll do it. Right?
We have a hackathon coming up. Maybe I'll try to
There you
experiment
go.
with that.
See, but well, A, that's what hackathons are good for, but B, like that I think is exactly why, Burton, you went from customer support to programming. Like you obviously have this attitude of I can learn this, like I don't know how to, but I'm willing to put in the time and the effort. And I think that's such a valuable lesson right there. I am kind of curious because, again, like we keep bringing up the fact that like you go around and you give presentations, and that's something that Matt and I really love doing as well. And we're always really intrigued with some of the questions that we get after our
Mm.
presentations because it shows us like how other people are already thinking about that topic and applying it to their needs or their specific purposes. So I'm just kind of curious, like as you've gone around and you've spoken about these different topics, what are maybe some myths or just misconceptions really that people have about design systems or about web components?
Oh, there's always a handful. I mean, design systems. First one is that design systems are for designers, and that's usually one of the first slides that I have in there is like design systems are not for designers. That's they're for everyone, and I think that's again bad marketing on the on the design system naming convention. But I think the other thing too is that design systems are hard to do initially, which I think they require some forethought and they require a little bit of research. But I don't think like everyone thinks that, oh, in order for me to do a design system, I need to have this fancy Figma or some kind of design tool to now design these components and document it. And then now I need to now have skills to code it and things like that. And I think that those are nice to have, but I by no means feel like those are required for engineers or designers. Even in this code of AI, I mean, we're seeing some crazy things happen with, people can create a Figma design, and then with Figma MCP, they can hook it up to an AI agent and have it generate some code. Now, I will say, huge caveat on that. I have seen some abysmal accessibility and 'cause semantics come out of that. But I've also seen some really good stuff, very interesting and very pretty good quality stuff come out of some of those examples as well. So I think that, AI is helping break down some of those barriers, but I also think that they're not necessarily barriers in the first place. If you're a coder and you like to code, you don't have to have a fancy Figma with all your designs in it before you start building a design system. nothing preventing you from starting that from code, and it's pretty cool to be able to do that. That's how I started. I built a lot of design systems code first, no design specs before they ever went live. So don't feel like there are barriers for entry on those.
Yeah. It's such an incredible time to be a coder right now. So many possibilities and man, just so much opportunity for
We were
starting
just talking
businesses.
like a couple hours ago, weren't we, Matt? Where it's like
Yeah.
4 years ago, 3 years ago, if someone had asked me to do something, to code in maybe a framework I don't know, I instantly probably would have had imposter syndrome. But today it's like, yeah, I'll take a look at that because I feel
Yeah, give it a shot.
right. I just feel so much more confident knowing that I have this like built-in mentor and teacher where I can be like, hey, what is going on here? Explain this to me. I don't know. AI is annoying in a lot of instances, but really amazing as well.
Yeah. So that leads me into my next question, which is if you were starting your career today, knowing what you know about the intersection of UX and engineering, and in this age of AI too, what kata or fundamental skill would you practice every single day?
Uh, I would say the people skills have been hands down the most critical for me, and learning the communication piece. That I think is probably the most important. Like, it'd be really easy for me to hermit into my little cubby and, just code away, but, the successes that I've found have come from the actual interaction piece of it. So I would say, first and foremost, those skills, those people skills, those communication skills, especially now in an age of AI, are very, very important because now I'm communicating to people, I'm communicating to AI agents, I'm communicating to, all these different places, and being able to make those the most meaningful and effective, I think have been very, very important skill. But then in terms of technology, I would say learning the new things. Don't be afraid. And actually, Brooke, I really like how you put that. Having this AI sidekick with me, being able to give me extra confidence to venture into new territory, has been very a nice safety net and a good confidence boost to be able to move forward into new stuff and trying things that I may not have tried as eagerly in the past. So this excitement to just give it a shot and ask questions and don't be afraid to look a little bit dumb. I actually like that AI is also totally comfortable with me asking really dumb questions and being like, I don't know what you just did. What is this? Like, please explain this to me. But then also being able to do that with your coworkers, I think is an important skill too. Helps, I think, break down barriers, tension, and people even like not necessarily pride, but like sometimes we get concerned that people are smarter than us or that they know more than we do or they think less of us or things like that. And I think it's okay to ask questions and be a little vulnerable once in a while with those. Because I feel like the technical pieces are changing so rapidly now that I could be like, "Hey, go read some CSS books or go read some HTML books." And while those would be beneficial, I think the connection piece would be way more powerful than and longer lasting than reading some books right now. Although I will say, go read some UX books. I think everyone should read UX books and
Mhm.
understand how users actually interact with things and how your users interact with things. That's, I think, a very important skill as well.
If only we could teach some of our coworkers to speak as kindly as AI though, because you would ask it a question, you're like, "I don't understand what you said," and it's like, "It's okay, like, it's common for
Yeah.
people not to know that answer," and you're like, "Thank you."
Well, that's another thing, right? Like, learn to be polite. There's a lot of engineers who maybe think they're going to get ahead by maybe being rude or or maybe they're just default that way. But from what I've seen is that backfires eventually.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like a lot of engineers felt like they could stand on their technical prowess, and they're like, "Oh, it's okay if I'm mean because I'm really good at coding." Well, I don't know if that's a leg to stand on as much anymore. So I think definitely having those interpersonal skills is going to be way more important later.
I've seen
Yes.
people get fired, like, point blank for their bluntness, I will say.
Mm.
So but We have one more question for you, but before that question, I would just like to kind of put it out there. Like, is there anything you feel like we haven't covered with anything really? Like anything you'd like to share with our listeners you feel like maybe we could add on to this discussion?
Ooh, I will. I'll throw out there one thing. This is actually a very simple thing that I've started doing when I was at Microsoft, and I feel like has been a very valuable tool for me every time I've approached a new job type or a new adventure. And that's my UX framework. It's very simple. It's just 5 simple questions, and this is for anything that you do, whether you're drafting an email, creating a PowerPoint presentation, writing code, writing a book, whatever it is. So I have 5 questions I always ask. One, who are my users or my audience? Two is what are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? Three, how do I help them do that? Four, uh, what am I trying to get them to do? And five, how do I incentivize them to do that? So anytime I start to approach a project or some kind of even a message, like if I'm trying to draft a message, I try to kind of pull up that framework a little bit, and I'll use that to help me guide me a little bit because I lose track of sometimes, especially when I get really emotional about something and I'm like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. And, I just kind of will go on a rage mode or a rage code type scenario. I think if I step back and ask those questions and kind of evaluate, make sure that I'm being empathetic and make sure I'm speaking to my audience appropriately and making sure that I'm taking care of them, but also getting what I need to out of it at the end, I think a good balance that I wish more engineers and content creators did when they approached new ideas.
When I was teaching, you're reminding me of this kind of phrase that I learned. There was this Stephen Covey who started Franklin Covey. His company started a kind of like a children's program. So back
Mm.
my previous life, my other career back in teaching, we had this, it was like the 7 principle. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's like Franklin Covey's.
The 7 habits of highly
Yeah.
effective people.
Well, but
Mm.
yeah, and this one was specifically for kids though. But
Cool.
what I liked about it though was that it made it just these like one-liner simple principles for
Hmm.
success, right? And one of them was to begin with the end in mind. And that was just something I like, it just stuck in my head. And I don't know why, but it really, same thing. Like when I would be putting together presentations or even a lesson plan for my students, it was always, what is the end goal here? What are they trying to accomplish? What am I trying to accomplish for them? What do we want to achieve by the end of this lesson? And that was always my starting point. And then I kind of worked backwards from there. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
if that's what we want to accomplish, what are going to be the stepping stones to get there? And, how do I actually implement that lesson plan of sorts? But yeah, that's just reminded me of what you were saying.
Yeah. And that ties really good into our last question of the show, which is on this show, we're all about living your ultimate dev life and not just like doing good at your job, but like loving your job. And so for you, Burton, how would you define an ultimate dev life in software development? And what are the things you do to live your best dev life?
I think for me, one of my favorite things is sharing as I go, and that's one of the reasons why I like to go speak. I like to share, hey, I did this thing. Here's how it helped me. Here's how it can help you. I wrote an article a little while back. There's AI kind of puts us through some weird existential crises sometimes where we're like, am I valuable anymore? Like, what am I doing? It kind of messes with your head a little bit. And I wrote an article a little while back. I'm like, well, why do I do what I do? And it reminds me of the King's Highway. Have you guys ever heard of that little parable or analogy, little story, I guess? So the idea is that a king builds a beautiful highway to connect towns together. Before it opens, he invites everyone to see who can travel the road the best. And so people travel, the road and as they travel to the king, they're like, "Hey, this was a beautiful road. It was so great, but there's this big pile of rocks in the middle of the road." So it that was kind of ruined the experience for me. And so all day you heard these complaints about it. And then one day, one guy at the end of the day, one guy shows up tired, disheveled, and dirty, and he's like, "Hey, saw there's a big pile of rocks in the road, and I decided to move it. And there's this big pile of money under it. And so I thought I'd return it to you so you could give it to whoever it belongs to. And he's like, "Oh, that," King's like, "That's for you. That's your money." And he's like, "No, that's not mine." He's like, "No, no, it is. It's," and he says, "He who travels the road best is he who makes the road smoother for those who will follow." And so I've always taken that into heart that, as I learn and as I make things better for myself, I love being able to share that to hopefully make the road smoother for someone else who's following behind me, and it makes it easier for them. So I think that's like kind of what drives my open source mentality and why I like to build things in open source, why I like to go speak at conferences and things like that. Plus, it's really fun to nerd out with fellow technologists about things. I can't talk about the same kind of stuff at a dinner party as I can when I go to a tech conference or a podcast. And so it's very fun to hang out with like-minded people. But really, I love the idea of software being a mechanism for me to help give back to those who are following behind me.
I love that. That's so, and you can speak about this at dinner parties. You just sound like the super smart one, right?
They're like, Burton's at it again. All right, web components, we got it.
Love it. Well, Burton, if someone would like to connect with you, maybe they'd like to have you come speak at their event or something, how can they find you? Where's a good place for them to connect with you?
I'm on most social media platforms. I'm at Stuffbreaker, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Burton Smith. Unfortunately, there was another Burton Smith that once worked at Microsoft. So when you Google my name, if you look up Burton Smith, Microsoft, there's a way more famous Burton Smith than me. So I'm not him, just in case you were wondering. But you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. I try to be pretty responsive on any of those social media platforms. So feel free to reach out. I love connecting with people. So I'm very open to new.
Awesome. And how about all of you listeners? How have you used design systems or web components at your company or personal projects? And what tips or questions do you have? Leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below. If you're listening on the podcast, you can come find us on YouTube in the ng-conf channel, and then go to the Dev Life playlist and you can leave any comments there. And this is the Dev Life.